Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another exciting collaboration, this time with Tyler Brunkhorst, who's going to walk us through how he shot and edited this KRB Audi shot. Now, fun fact about Tyler, he was a part of the Forza game development team as a 3D vehicle artist, and I'm pretty sure that's what got him into car photography. Now, Tyler went out of his way to create this awesome walkthrough video. And as a token of appreciation, I'd like you guys to go ahead and follow Tyler on Instagram. I'll also link up his YouTube channel in the description below, so make sure to check it out. That's it from my end. Tyler, the floor is all yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Tyler Brunkhorst. I'm honored to be here to show some of my behind the scenes and some of the techniques I use to light paint this really cool Audi race car. If you're new to light painting or have done this before, I hope you'll pick up some new tips or techniques to help you in your light painting adventures. How I capture images on location varies slightly depending on what environment I'm shooting in and the subject itself. This shoot happened to be captured in a studio environment with lighting we could control to be very dark. So when shooting outdoors with ambient light, the best location you could be in is one with as minimal ambient light as possible. That'll help cut down on your cleanup time in post-production. I originally started my light painting adventures with a simple LED wand from an auto parts store, but since have expanded to include strobe flashes for primary key lighting and constant LED lights for extra detailed passes. For the beginners, you don't need to rush out to acquire any expensive gear. One of the most exciting prospects of light painting is how far you can get in light painting an entire vehicle with a single light source and some patience in post-production. In fact, some of the least expensive lighting solutions I purchased have delivered the best results, hands down. I'd like to thank Mo for pointing me to the Godox ML30. It's been my favorite constant LED light to use and even features an optional softbox light modifier, which is perfect for light painting. In fact, I'm using it right now. Beyond lighting, one of the greatest tools to make light painting easier is a remote shutter release, so you can start and end exposures away from the camera, which both reduces the chances of bumping the camera out of alignment and makes the process of capturing the vehicle even quicker start to finish. This means less time on location and frees up more time to be creative in post. I'm a strong advocate for sharing techniques by simply showing behind the scenes to articulate the advantages of post-production by using layers and, most importantly, having fun with creative solutions. This is how I found Mo's channel, and I appreciate his investment to continued education for the creative community, and channels like his make this type of photography accessible to a multitude of skill levels and backgrounds. Light painting is a lot of fun and creates some stunning results without a huge budget on lighting gear. Once you iron out your own flow on location, it'll make your life easier in post-production. So enough talking, let's get right to it. So starting off, here's a GoPro time-lapse footage showing the camera on a tripod, and you can see the exposures occurring, and the speed of the time-lapse isn't capturing the flash from the strobe, which is pretty funny to see. I'm really just walking around trying to capture extra footage of the vehicle instead of just your key image and moving on. I found that without some of that data, in particular some dark areas or overly bright areas, if you're able to recover that with some of the extra images, it's been helpful. So after the strobes, I moved to the Godox ML30. It's a constant LED light, and it's been my go-to for light painting, in particular on glossy cars with nice shiny paint. It's been producing very clean results, and the softbox light modifier in particular was a nice addition coming from basically an LED wand that I had, and this larger point of light has smoothed out the reflections and made some of my images earlier on easier to work with rather than requiring a bunch of cleanup and post. Here's the real-time pace that I use when walking around the vehicle, which I adjusted to slow down or speed up after reviewing the frames on camera while on location. I'm using a Nikon D850 with ISO set at 64. This helps create a noise-free image as much as possible, though like most modern cameras, when shooting in RAW, it has a respectable dynamic range where the exposures can be adjusted in Camera Raw or Lightroom, and that way you can get exactly what you need. So try to target at least 80% perfection with your images in this phase and dial them in post. I'm using a remote trigger to start and end exposures, as I've appreciated the use of timed exposures and potentially having to run around the vehicle too fast or not having enough time to get my intended light pass. It's important to review images on location after a few exposures have been captured to track and confirm you're getting adequate coverage of the vehicle, and try to get some variations of those same passes so you can pick and choose the best examples to include in your final composition. Here's a brief look at some of the raw images I captured, most of which will never be used, and just extra lighting information available to me if I need it. Sometimes you can use these extra passes to remix and restyle the image in a completely different mood than you originally set out to capture when you arrived on location. After you've had some time to study the raw images you've captured in Bridge, it's time to bring them into Photoshop. An important image I like to capture before beginning the actual photo shoot or post-production is one like this. I found it super helpful to get the subject lit nice and bright to help frame the shot, and it gets the focus perfectly sharp in an effort to not touch the camera after you get started with the light painting segment of the shoot. When entering post-production phase, this also creates an image that's easier to trace using the pen tool before you get started compositing layers and distracted by all the fun and possibilities that are beginning to unfold. Tracing subjects with the pen tool is one of my least favorite things to do, but I feel strongly it is super critical to get done from the start and leaves you with nothing but all the fun creative work after that's done. By the way, I favor using masks on groups first and always trace out the car. Then I create a second group with an inverted selection of the car for use as the background. As the composition evolves, I'll create a global color correcting group and another for atmosphere and lights as they both go over the car and background. So after you're done cutting out the car, you're pretty much ready to jump right in. In this case, we're just going to focus on the car and the layer buildup as we go. This is the first image. I'm going to disable the car background. I'm going to disable the mask on the group so we can see the entirety of these layers as we build them up, and then re-enable them in context. So the very first image is this very strong shadow on the ground. This is primarily the shot I had in mind from the beginning of the shoot, and the resulting image is about what I wanted, and the reflections on the floor on the right side is a little bit too much, so it's something we can take out with additional images that we captured. You also note the color difference between the floor and the studio and the floor of the garage, so that's something that we can cover with a curves adjustment and a little bit of a patch tool and heal brush. So let's start to add in additional light passes. The rear, the side, the overhead, the wheels, making slight adjustment layers as we go. In particular, this window I thought was a little bit too blown out from that strobe image, so I think I took an image from a light wand pass and used a curves adjustment in this case to give it a little bit of life to match it into the specular highlight that's on the door. And so I noticed a little bit later on the logo there on the door is blown out, so I ended up masking parts of that out and then recovering that from additional lighting passes. Also, the light that was behind the car when I was lighting it in this studio was a bit bright, so I darkened this by creating a sample from another layer, cutting it in between the roll bars. That helps blend it in later when we have a color grade on the entire image and then also the atmosphere in place. I noticed also the wheels were a little bit dark, so I found a exposure that had better lighting on the rubber on the wheel and aspects of the spokes, and then the same thing with the front. Now, there needed to be a little bit of a color blend there. The original image that I captured was a little bit dark, so I used curves there to match it. So let's close down this group and see it in context, the car by itself. So jumping right into the background, I just flood filled a single color, and it really didn't matter what it was at that time. And through the process of color grading and other adjustments, I ended up at this blue color, and I thought it worked pretty well in the final image. And so essentially building this image up from the background, we're starting to set the car in its environment. So I took a raw image from one of the strobe passes and dropped this in, desaturated it, and this gave a nice start to cleaning up that strong reflection that was on the floor from the strobe pass with the strong shadow on the ground. So start to introduce that strong shadow in, and instead we're painting out that very strong highlight. That was simply done with a paintbrush, nothing special. So after incorporating that strong shadow pass, I started to add in, with a paintbrush, just a few glow layers. And this helps separate the car from the environment, including this glow pass for the taillights, which makes more sense when we add the light pass in. So some of these passes were done after color grading to help the car read in the environment, and it's something that you can go back and forth. So that's part of the reason why naming layers and particular groups is important, so you understand what your contribution was at that time. In this case, there's a couple layers I've darkened and lightened in certain areas. In this context, doesn't make much sense until you get to the color grading phase. By naming things, you're not chasing down untitled one or layer 503. You have a better chance at understanding what's doing what. I found some of the areas of this image was dark, and I used a curves layer to start to brighten that up and start to use paintbrush to basically fade that out as we go. I found one layer that was almost like a caustic reflection, which has been really cool effect. And there's a few of those layers that we'll see here in a few seconds. And it kind of gives a nice reflection from the chrome wheels. And it's just a nice touch. And then adding some further glow. Skipping ahead, I'm going to add the global adjustments to make in context closer to the final image some of the things that were done there. A lot of these were just color balances, some curves. We can break those down really quick. There's not a whole lot here, but in particular for the curves, this is where I ended up with RGB, and then fine tuning just the reds, the greens, and blues as I go. I found that it's better for me sometimes to stack some of these color balances, and they're a little bit similar, but at the same time, it's something I can remove or modify as I go versus trying to get it all done in one pass. There occasionally photo filters useful. This is something that will be seen later when we have the atmosphere turned on. So let's go right to the atmosphere. This is the end result. These guys are just either sometimes painted in with a paintbrush and then using a radial gradient or linear gradient. So we're blending in some of these broad lighting sources to give that motivated lighting, and then also some light rays to give it a little bit sense of emotion and drama to the image. I also found that if I painted in a little bit more atmosphere behind the car, it helped seat the car into the environment. Moving on to the lights layer, essentially these guys were individual captures, and just using screen instead of lighten in some of these cases, I was able to apply them directly to the ground, which looked pretty cool. The tail lights, I think this image really created a bit of character to it. When I'm near the end of a composition, feeling strong about it, I like to select all, copy merge, and then paste a copy of that. At that point, I convert the layer to a smart object. That way it's in a sense a non-destructive layer, so that we can open that up, edit it, apply certain filters. In this case, I went through the image, I used Camera Raw to make some adjustments for a final color grade, and then ended up with something like this and added a little bit of texture. So we can go look at that before and then after again. So after clicking on Camera Raw, you can open up that image with all the attributes maintained in place, and it's something that you can easily modify and make adjustments retroactively instead of it being a destructive layer and only one direction. There isn't too much going on here, really just added some texture and some clarity, give a nice sharp crisp image to it, and it's too easy to possibly go overboard with this. I felt this was a moment where it was needing that type of help, and I did that. For the most part, everything's done up here, just moving the highlights and shadows around and a little bit of tint. It's just how you feel in that moment. Every day it might be a little bit different, but this is how I ended up that particular day. So if you look at some of the additional panels, I did some curves adjustment, color grading, kind of moved some of the shadows and midtones around. Nothing really too on purpose, but just how it felt in that moment. And from that point, pretty much have your image. And then after staring at it for a bit, I decided I'd add one more color grade, and this is where I ended up. For the most part, this is the before and the after. From the post-production beginning to end, this is my result. I'm excited that I got the chance to photograph and document the state of this car as it arrived in its new owner's hands, and then excited to see also the evolution that will take place of this car. So hopefully there's more of this vehicle to come, and most importantly, shots of this car on track. There you have it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment on this video or reach out directly to me on Instagram at Tyler Brunkhorst. I'd be happy to help. Thank you so much again, Mo, for having me on. This was so much fun. We'll see ya.